앉아주시기 바랍니다. 이하 국민의례는 생략하도록 하겠습니다. 이어서 내빈 소개가 있겠습니다. 박교상 구미시의회 의장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 박정희 대통령 기념재단 한태준 상임이사님 참석해 주셨습니다. 박정희 대통령 기념재단 안호건 사무총장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 저 뒤쪽에 계시네요. 네, 박정희 대통령 기념재단 이종찬 기획총괄처장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 서울에서 멀리서 오셔서 인사를 다 드렸습니다. 그리고 사단법인 박정희 대통령 생가보존회 정재화 이사장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 민주평통 구미시 협의회 김구호 회장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 바르게 살기 운동 경상북도 협의회 김재원 회장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 바르게 살기 운동 구미시 협의회 이재건 회장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국 김용창 이사장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국 김형식 상임이사님 참석해 주셨습니다. 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국 정하영 이사님 참석해 주셨습니다. 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국 이상현 이사님 참석해 주셨습니다. 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국 진호선님 우리 이사님입니다. 참석해 주셨습니다. 네, 이상으로 내빈 소개는 마치겠습니다. 혹시 빠진 분 계시면 말씀을 해주시면 제가 소개를 해드리도록 하겠습니다. 다음은 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국 김용창 이사장님의 인사 말씀이 있겠습니다. 네, 우선 간단하게 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
기억이 없던 건데. 어제 오늘 이런 행사 또 영화 함께 했었으면 더 좋았으리라 생각이 되는데 오늘 오후 1시 반부터 연애 오늘 아마 5시 정도까지는 함께 하는 시간을 갖게 돼서 무척 감사를 드리고 그리고 우리 박교상 의장님을 비롯한 내빈 여러분들께도 또 감사를 드리고 특히 우리 박정희와 사단법인 회원 여러분들께 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 늘 감사드립니다. 지난번 우리 50주년 기념비 제막식에 참석하시고 아마 처음 뵙는 것 같습니다. 다시 한번 기념비에 회원 여러분들의 참여해 주신 데 다시 한번 또 깊은 감사를 드리고 오늘 이름이 어려워서 한번 보고 하도록 하겠습니다. 세비스티앙 베르트랑 박사님입니다. 교수님보다 박사님 오늘 먼 걸음 여기 구미까지 해주셔서 또 좋은 우리가 또 혹시 이곳에서 태어난 우리 이 시대의 영웅인 우리 박정희 대통령 역사를 더 아마 깊게 아마 설명해 주시고 이야기해 주시리라 저는 믿습니다. 오늘도 영화를 보면서도 좀 또 새로운 것들 눈물을 저는 많이 흘리면서 1시간 동안 영화를 봤습니다만 오늘 좋은 강의 그리고 우리 아이고 조남을 제가 잊어버려가지고 상임 감사님을 비롯한 또 서울의 재단에서 함께 해주신 분들께 또한 감사를 드리겠습니다. 저희들이 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국을 시작한 지가 이제 만 5년이 지났습니다만은 지금 아기가 태어나서 지금 걸음걸이를 좀 겨우 하는 그 시기에 있습니다. 여러분들께서도 또 우리 회원이 아닌 분들도 오늘 몇 분이 아마 계시리라 믿습니다만은 많은 홍보와 또 이 재단이 더욱더 좀 발전이 될 수 있도록 참여해 주시기를 거듭 부탁드리면서 오늘 함께 많은 분들이 참여해 주신 데 대해 깊은 감사를 드리면서 좋은 강의 듣도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
감사합니다. 네, 다음은 박교상 구미시 의회 의장님 인사 말씀 부탁드리겠습니다. 짧게 한번 부탁드리겠습니다.
예, 반갑습니다. 박정희 대통령님하고 오늘 관계 오늘따라 특별해요. 사실 1시 반에 그 공산 호텔에서 경상북도 자연보호 회장님들 지금 세미나를 하고 계십니다. 그 역시 우리 박정희 대통령께서 주창하십니다. 그래서 이 말씀을 어떻게 드려야 될는지 모르겠습니다. 박정희 그러면 저희들 가슴이 먹먹하고 저희들은 그렇게 느끼고 있습니다만 예전에 배고라 보지 않고 눈물 젖은 빵을 먹지 않았던 사람들이 그 기억을 못 하는지는 모르겠습니다. 그러나 예전에 그렇게 어렵고 힘들게 살아오셨던 분들은 그분을 영원히 잊지 못하실 겁니다. 그런데 사실 외국에서는 그분을 존경을 받고 그분이 아니라 그분 때문에 대한민국이라는 나라가 인정을 받고 사는데 정작 우리 나라에서는 그렇게 하고 있는가 이런 생각이 들고 제가 가끔은 어떤 분들이 그 국가안에 대해서 이야기를 하고 친일이다 이런 말씀을 하실 때도 있어요. 그때 제가 이런 말씀을 드립니다. 당신 조상은 독립운동가였는지 모르겠다. 독립운동을 하지 않는 분들은 다 친일 아이가. 그런 사람들 다 세금 내고 했으면 다 친일이다. 그 당시에 나라를 잃어서 먹고 살기 힘들고 살기 위해서는 어쩔 수 없는 방법이었었다. 그리고 또 hir보니까 사실은 영국의 일본의 압력을 받으면서 개항이라든지 이런 걸 받으면서 영국 유학을 이끌어가거든요. 그때 가서 배우고 느끼고 해서 아시아를 침략합니다. 그런데 박정희 대통령께서 그런 말씀을 하시거든요. 일본을 알지 못하고는 우리가 그렇게 일본을 앞설 수는 없다. 그러나 지금 불과 얼마 전에 제가 일본을 앞섰다는 말도 나오고 있습니다. 그만큼 그 해안을 가지시고 봐왔는데 아직까지 후배로서 대한민국에 사는 국민으로서 그렇게 하지 못한 부분에 대해서는 늘 그렇게 생각하고 있으면서 또 어떻게 본다면은 이 단체가 이런 좋은 일을 하고 계십니다만은 너무 또 많고 또 그러고 이런 사실 교육은 구미에서 해야 되는 게 외국 분들이 오시면 구미에서 당연하게 해야 되지만 여기 계신 분들은 너무 잘 알고 계시기 때문에 또 특별한 오늘 자리입니다만은 또 프랑스에서 교수분이 오셔가지고 강의를 한다는 것은 또 아주 특별한 것 같습니다. 그래서 이제 오신 것 같은데 우리가 다시 한 번 더 박정희라는 분을 되새겨보고 또 그래서 우리 후손들한테도 어떻게 해서 이렇게 왔다 하는 것도 우리가 교육을 해야 되지 않을까 이런 생각을 해봅니다. 오늘 귀한 시간 내어 오셨는데 뜻깊은 시간 되셨으면 좋겠습니다. 네, 고맙습니다.
네, 감사합니다. 다음은 사단법인 박정희 대통령 생가 보존회 정재화 이사장님의 인사 말씀이 있겠습니다.
네, 반갑습니다. 오늘 정말 날씨도 무더운데 본 행사를 위해 가지고 이 자리에 함께 해주신 박교상 의장님을 비롯해서 각 단체 대한민들 그리고 박 대통령을 숙모하는 우리 단체 여러분들께도 진심으로 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 사실은 우리 김용창 이사장님께서 오늘 이 행사를 주최를 하고 있습니다. 프랑스에 계시는 교수님께서 우리 박 대통령님을 세계적으로 알리기 위해서 공부도 하고 연구를 해서 오늘 이 자리에 오셔가지고 저희들한테 강의를 하게 됐습니다. 정말 이 자리를 빌어서 다시 한번 감사의 인사를 드리겠습니다. 외국에서도 이렇게까지 박 대통령님을 위해 가지고 많은 연구를 하시고 또 홍보를 해주시는데 정말 우리 구미 시민의 한 사람으로서 과연 우리가 어떻게 지내 나왔는지 한번 더 되새기 봐야 할 시기 해야 안 되겠나 그런 생각이 듭니다. 앞으로 우리 교수님 말씀을 잘 듣고 또 우리 단체장님들 그리고 숙모단체 회원님들 더욱더 우리 박 대통령님을 위해 가지고 더 많은 활동과 홍보를 할 수 있는 그런 계기가 됐으면 합니다. 오늘 즐거운 강의를 들으시고 즐거운 하루 되시길 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다. 다음은 국민의힘 구미시을 국회의원 강명구 의원께서 다른 일정 때문에 참석은 못하시고 지금 축전을 보내셨거든요. 요거 잠깐 읽어드리겠습니다. 축전, 구미시민 세계 속의 박정희를 만나다 개최를 진심으로 축하드립니다. 이 자리를 마련해 주신 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국 관계자 여러분께 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드리며 오늘 연사로 나서주신 세비스티앙 베르트랑 수빌께도 환영의 인사를 전합니다. 모쪼록 이번 행사를 통해 고 박정희 대통령의 업적을 다시 한번 돌아보는 의미 있는 시간이 되길 바라며 지속적인 행사로 이어지길 기원드립니다. 감사합니다. 네, 감사드립니다. 네, 이어 많은 분들이 계시지만 시간 관계상 생략하는 점 양해를 부탁드리도록 하겠습니다. 다음은 강연에 앞서 오늘 강연을 해주실 연사님을 간략히 소개시켜 드리도록 하겠습니다. 네. 아, 그럴까요? 그럼 좀 영광이죠. 네, 그럼 우리 연사님은 박정희 대통령 기념재단의 한태준 상임이사님께서 소개를 좀 해주시는 걸로. 알겠습니다. 연사 세비스티앙 베르트랑 교수는 박정희 대통령의 업적을 프랑스에 알린 역사학자이며 현재 베르트랑 교수는 그랑제콜의 프레파라투아르 수업에서 역사와 지정학을 가르치고 있고 베르트랑 교수는 2023년 12월에 프랑스 정부의 학술 분야 최고 공로 훈장인 팔름 아카데믹 기사장을 수상하였습니다. 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
여러분들 하던 얘기를 계속 하겠습니다. 한국말을 못해서 죄송합니다. Ladies and gentlemen, first let me thank the Park Chung-hee Memorial Foundation and its Executive Director, Dr. Han Tae-jun, for their support and for letting me always free of my words and of what I'm going to say today. This is really important, you know, for professors, for teachers to be free when they are doing researches. And this is for me the most valuable thing that the Park Chung-hee Memorial Foundation can bring me in my research. let me thank also the member of the City Council of Kumi and all the members and friends of the 박정희 Museum in Kumi for warm welcoming me today. I really hope I won't disappoint you by my work. I will do my best. Maybe as an introduction, I will answer to frequently asked questions. It was not my fault. Yeah, a question that has been often asked me is why I am working on President 박정희. Actually, I was born in 1978, and I belong to the very first generation of French people who grew up with Asian cultures. So as a child, as a teenager, I was influenced by Japanese cartoons and also by Asian culture. But I only had, at this time, a very vague image of Korea. Three things were in my mind when I was a child and a teenager. The first is some knowledge about the Korean War and the great poverty of South Korea in the 50s after the Korean War. The second picture is the Seoul Olympic Games in 1988. It is one of my first memories of television. And the third is the arrival of South Korean products in France in the 80s and in the 90s, especially the Samsung video cassette, which my mother bought because she found them to be strong, inexpensive, and good quality. And that's when I discovered Samsung in the late 80s. Furthermore, in 2003, I watched the documentary from the series People's Century. The part 16 was called 1951 Asia Rising, and this documentary focused on the economic rise of Japan and South Korea. And this documentary showed a lot of pictures about the rise of South Korea and talk a lot about President Park Chung-hee, often in very critical terms. In this documentary, I watched pictures from the tragedy of the 15 August 1974, the well-known assassination attempt on President Park Chung-hee. And you all know what's happened this day. The assassin killed by mistake the First Lady Yoo Kyung-soo. President Park Chung-hee had the reflex to be hidden behind his desk. And just after the assassination attempt, he got up and pronounced these words, 하던 얘기를 계속 하겠습니다. I watched this picture and this documentary, and this moment of history made a deep impression on me. I was fascinated by the reaction, by the self-control of President Park, especially at that time. For me, it was the symbol of South Korean perseverance in overcoming all difficulties, even the worst, despite the most terrible obstacles. And as a young teacher, I always tried after to show these pictures and to explain that through these pictures you could have a summary, a synthesis of South Korean spirit during the Park Chung-hee era. Since my arrival at the Cité Scolaire Janson de Sailly in 2013, I have been able to talk much more about South Korean history for three reasons. We had a special connection with the South Korean embassy in France, which allowed me to organize meetings with my students and the representative of the Republic of Korea. I am in charge of a class of students for preparatory classes for high schools, and their program, their history and geopolitics program, allow me to talk a lot about the history of South Korea, especially about the Park Chung-hee era. And furthermore, I am also in charge of a class of much younger students of Chinese International Section. They are 11 years old, and with these students I talk about history and geography on all the countries in Asia, including South Korea. My goal is to show you how it is possible in France to work with students, young students, on the key figure of President Park, maybe the most representative figure in the history of South Korea. My method for doing this is simple. First, I will take into account all aspects of President Park's leadership. I will work with a lot of sources, including President Park's point of view, widely expressed in many books. As you know, President Park wrote a lot of books. All of them have been translated into English, so this is a very precious source to understand what he wanted to do with South Korea. And third, I will try systematically to put the thing into historical context. This is necessary to see what the situation of South Korea was before the Park Chung-hee era, with these millions of orphans in the streets and the poverty. First of all, the political aspect, the construction of a strong state with solid institutions. The title, To Build a Nation, is the title of a book that has been published by President Park in 1971, designated Book of the Year by the Britannica edition. So it is important for French students to have a better understanding of President Park, to start from the very concrete elements and from his work, a global work that cannot be reduced to economic aspects and which is part of a very particular context. First of all, as I said, the political thing, the political part, the construction of a strong state. I always try to explain the reasons that pushed President Park to carry out three important political measures. The first one is the famous coup d'etat in 1961. In France, the word coup d'etat is often associated with a bloody takeover, with massacre of opponents. It is therefore important for me to explain exactly what happened in May 1961, to explain the motivation, the goals, the strategy, and the consequences of the coup d'etat. Park Chung-hee, General Park at that time, and the young officials took power with precise goals. Without bloodshed, there wasn't any casualties during this coup d'etat, and even President Yun Po-sun approved this coup d'etat because he recognized that it was the only way to come out from poverty and from chaos. And after this coup d'etat became a real revolution from the government, which spread into the entire people. The second great decision of President Park in policy was the integration into a structure of the Republic. You know, in France, we are really attached to the Republic and to electoral processes. We can therefore explain to the student that President Park accepted the game of elections. He was elected president in 1963, as you know, re-elected in 1967 and in 1971. And if you see the result of his opponents during the election, it showed that the political opposition existed and did play a major role in South Korea during the more authoritarian direction. However,
I think we must try to explain it to the students and to make them realize what were the motivation of President Park at that time and what was the historical context. Thus, in the documents I give to my students, I insist on the political stability of the Park Chung-hee era with the date of the re-election, the several republics and constitution, and I emphasize some quotation from him. Here is a quotation translated into French. President Park said in 1971, "We are not allowed, after so much effort to escape poverty, to interrupt the way of our development." Which means that President Park took the hard decision to make the Yushin Constitution with economic motivation. He was afraid of seeing his long-term development strategy called into question or even abandoned by the opposition. He was afraid of the withdrawal of American troops from South Korea and of the threat of North Korea. He was afraid of a breakdown of South Korea after he left the power, and he needed some more years to achieve his great task. That was the motivation. If we compare the situation in South Korea during the Yushin Constitution with the three other little dragons in East Asia, Hong Kong, the British colony of Hong Kong, the city-state of Singapore, and the Republic of China, Taiwan, we can notice that the country where you can have the most political liberty is South Korea. In Republic of China, Taiwan, only one party was allowed at that time, the Kuomintang. In the city-state of Singapore, the People Actions Party of Lee Kuan Yew had all the seats at the Parliament of Singapore till 1984. And in the British colony of Hong Kong, the Legislative Council was appointed by the British government, no elections. So it is in South Korea, even with a lot of restrictions, that you can find a political opposition and opposition leaders who dare to oppose it to President Park. President Park accepted that to a certain extent because he considered that South Korean people were attached to quarrels and political issues and controversies, so it was necessary to leave some place for opposition, even with a lot of restrictions. The geopolitical aspect is actually easier to demonstrate to the students because the students of preparatory classes for high school in France, they know a lot about the world of the Cold War. So the goal of President Park for South Korea is to play an active role in the world of the Cold War, which is really important. South Korea, since the end of the Korean War, is considered by all other countries as a poor victim, as a poor little thing, and President Park, who was a real patriot and very proud of his country, couldn't accept this and say we must play a leading role in the world of the Cold War. Even if we are a poor country, we can't stay forever a victim of the events, a victim of the circumstances. For that, the first important thing was to maintain a close friendship, a close relation to the United States of America. It was not really simple for President Park. Sometimes it went very well. You can see here President Park with President Kennedy in 1963. Sometimes it was much more complicated. Here President Park with President Ford in 1975, because President Park didn't want to be dominated by the United States. But he was constantly repeating, we need the United States to help us to recover because we are a poor country and we can't do everything from our own, so we need the support of the United States. But we must never forget that we are South Koreans, we are not the mercenaries of the Americans. The second aspect of this geopolitics area of President Park's task is a very ambitious Asian policy, a policy of alliance with non-communist countries to break the isolation. President Park was afraid of the fact that South Korea, if you consider South Korea in the world of the Cold War, in East Asia, it is like an island. In the north, you have North Korea, communist country. In the west, you have communist China. And in the east, you have Japan. Japan is a former colonial power of South Korea. So it was really important for President Park to say, we can't stand like this, and we must break this danger of being isolated in Northeast Asia. And that's why, in 1965, despite a strong opposition, he took the responsibility to sign a treaty to normalize the relations with Japan. It was not easy to do that at that time, because, as you know, there was a strong opposition to Japan only 20 years after the end of World War II. But President Park took this responsibility because he knew that Japan was necessary to help South Korea to recover and to rise from its ashes from World War II. The second important fact that I want to emphasize is the big tour that President Park did in Southeast Asia in 1966, visiting Malaysia, Kingdom of Thailand, and Republic of China, Taiwan, to explain to this country that an alliance between all the non-communist Asian countries was necessary to be stronger against the spread of communism in Asia. And the third aspect is the Conference of Manila in Philippines with Marcos in 1966. President Park took the hard decision to send troops to the Vietnam War and to participate to the Vietnam War. And it is very important to explain that to the students, especially the French students. You know, maybe also in South Korea, most of the people of the young generation think that the Vietnam War is the war between Vietnam country and between the United States, which is wrong. This is a war between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and the United States, as well as Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, South Korea, supported South Vietnam, supported the Republic of Vietnam, and President Park thought that the South Vietnamese were like twin brothers of South Korea, so they needed to be supported. But President Park wanted to see the world beyond Asia. He had a global foreign policy, and he was seeking to establish links with both developed countries like West Germany. This is a picture, a very symbolic picture that was taken in West Germany during the official state visit of President Park at the end of the year 1964. And you can see here President Park in West Berlin, looking at the Berlin Wall, looking at East Berlin and East Germany. President Park reported after, through the Berlin Wall, through East Germany, I saw North Korea. President Park also developed relations with other European countries, among them France. I will talk about it later. But President Park wanted also to develop the solidarity among developing countries, among countries of the Third World. And that's why he invited many heads of states of developing countries, for instance here the President of Gabon, Omar Bongo, who made a state visit in 1975 to South Korea. Another aspect is the defense policy of South Korea. My students are always very surprised when I tell them that the defense policy of South Korea has been established in the late 60s by President Park himself with the concept of K-defense in 1968. And that's why South Korea is now one of the major armies of the world, because President Park in the late 60s knew that it was impossible to rely only on the United States in case of a new Korean War. So it is necessary to develop our own weapons and to develop the spirit of defense among the young generations to preserve and to maintain peace. And finally, the foreign policy of President Park is what I call a realistic foreign policy towards North Korea. President Park, 10 years before the American President Ronald Reagan, invented the theory of peace by strength. President Park was determined to talk with North Korea, and he did it. But he didn't want to talk with North Korea on a different level. President Park said, if we want to have a constructive talk with North Korea, if we want to reach to an agreement with North Korea, we must be at least on the same development and on the same political level. And that's why in the late 60s, he was inspired by the West German Chancellor Willy Brandt. Willy Brandt was the inspirator and the creator of the Ostpolitik, the East policy with East Germany, and President Park took his inspiration from Willy Brandt to develop his own foreign policy with North Korea. And it reached to the first agreement of history since the Korean War between the two Korean states in 1972. So that is President Park who was the first one who established a bridge between the two states during the international context of the so-called détente. All of this I try to explain to my students by showing them the complete text of the Treaty of Normalization of the relation between Japan and South Korea, which is really important. It is a basis, this treaty, for the future relation in 1965, and also to show them pictures, all the pictures I showed you, because through the picture, the students can recognize, famous figures like Kennedy or famous places like the Berlin Wall, and they can remember this. And beyond of this, I also show a picture from KTV News, KTV images showing South Korean soldiers in action during the Vietnamese War, to show the students again that the Vietnamese War is not the war of the state of Vietnam against the United States of America, but something much more complicated. And I think it is a tribute to the sacrifice of so many South Korean soldiers, who have been, for me, too often forgotten in this war. And I think this is really unfair, because they sacrifice themselves to defend the freedom and to fight against communism. The economic aspect, the so-called South economic miracle, is the most remarkable part of President Park's huge task. It is the one that is the most interesting for the students, it is the most famous, so I won't talk too much about it, because it is, for President Park is known above all for this economic part of his work. I just insist on the following aspects. First, the development strategy and the 5-year plans and exports. The thing that President Park was determined to give the state a leading role in the growth, which was not unusual at that time. You had the communist countries where the state was everything, and you have in many liberal countries a leading role of the state, even in France. And that the students are able to understand this, because at the same time in France we also had developing plans at that time, although we are of course a liberal state. The second thing is the creation of a heavy industry, as you may know, developing the emblematic example of POSCO. This picture is really interesting for the students. You can see, famous Park Tae-jun and Park Chung-hee next to each other, which also remind us the close association between the chaebols and the states. But the ruler, the leading role, was given to President Park. It wasn't the chaebol who ruled Korea. It was President Park, the government, the state, and the representative of the South Korean people. Third thing is the fast development of the countryside through the very famous Semal movement. We talk about it later. And to demonstrate this, I use two types of documents for my students. First of all, I take pictures from this documentary, People's Century, Asia Rising, which shows testimonies of South Korean, of Semal Undong activists in the 70s. I believe in their effect, in their strength of those kind of examples for the students, because when the students can hear testimony of people who experimented this, they automatically have another view on the period. And second, picture of famous speeches of President Park. You know, President Park was formerly a teacher, and he was fond of speeches and pronounced a lot of lectures and speeches, especially for the Seminole movement. So with sentences like, you must all work together, sweat together, that's the road to true wealth, I can demonstrate that there is a direct application between the theory and the activity of the Seminole movement. And I also add pictures, as you can see, these pictures, and tables, statistics to show the 5-year plans, the role of the chaebols, and I made the relations between the chaebols, which are involved in the heavy industry developing strategy, in the 5 years developing plans, to show to my student that all of this has a global comprehension, a global meaning. All of this is part of a global developing strategy. Therefore, I talk about the cultural, educational, and scientific aspect. This is often, for me, a very underrated, underestimated aspect of President Park's work. President Park's work is often reduced to his economic and political role. However, President Park worked to preserve and to enhance Korean heritage. He wanted to restore national pride. He wanted that the South Koreans could be proud of their history through figures such as Admiral Yi Sun-shin, and President Park wanted to build this statue so that the South Korean could have a person who was feared and admired by the Japanese at the same time. And the inauguration, as you may know, was set in 1968. He also developed and democratized education, university, high schools, and finally, he gave South Korea the foundation for its high-tech development. For instance, here, the foundation of the Korean Advanced Institute of Science in 1971. Therefore, I tried to make a connection for my students between these two aspects. First, with this photograph that show President Park, but also other members of the government, other civil servants, to show them the collective aspect of the government works under the rule of President Park. And next, I show a view of Gwanghwamun in 1977, with here the small, statue is big, but here on the picture it's very small, the statue of Admiral Yi Sun-shin, to show them that it is here a symbol of modernity, Gwanghwamun in 1977, rooted in its ancient history, a link between the past, the present, and the future. And I add that the foundation of the Korean Advanced Institute of Science, as well as the foundation of the Ministry of Science and Technology in 1967, which was the first ministry of that kind in developing countries, has finally led South Korea to the current smartphone and numerous technology where South Korea is one of the leaders in the world. And finally, I insist on the environmental aspect. President Park's action for environment is remarkable, and I can say that totally unknown in France and in many other countries. Even in South Korea, I could see by talking with many South Korean friends of the young generation that they totally ignore what President Park did for environment. It is very important for me to emphasize this with my students because, as you know, today we have a great sensitivity to environmental issues. At this time, during the years, the decades of economic growth, people didn't feel concerned by the environment, even in France. I mean, the 3 decades of the French most remarkable economic growth were also appointed by pollution, by environmental pollution. But South Korea is a special case. President Park is one of the rare, maybe one of the only heads of state who was concerned about the environment. Maybe the only head of state in the developing country at that time. Thus, he continued with the reforestation policy that had begun before but did not work very well. President Park was personally involved in environmental bills, decrees, and laws. And I can quote a lot of examples. I won't mention all of the laws, but I made a list for my students. Among them, the Forest Products Regulation Act in 1961, the Erosion Control Act in 1962, the Wild Animal Protection and Hunting Act in 1967, the Natural Park Act in 1967, which led to the creation of 12 national parks. And when I mentioned this to my students, they are really surprised because they saw that at that time you can find national parks only in the United States of America and in some European countries. But in South Korea at that time, it has been decided to create national parks. And finally, by the City Planning Act in 1971, President Park and his government introduced the so-called Greenbelt system, which forced every city to build some green belts, some forests around the city to protect the environment. So, of course, this did not eliminate all the pollution caused by economic development, but the facts, the law, show a real concern for nature at the same time. So for my students, I show them a lot of pictures, images with the evolution of landscapes in South Korea during these 2 decades. And it shows them how huge, how important was the changing at that time. But President Park's work is not limited to an enormous amount of achievements. It is important to show to the French student that a global philosophy emerged from all of this, a global project with a specific spirit, a specific South Korean spirit. First of all, the so-called philosophy of the can-do. And to illustrate this philosophy, I always show to my students the famous example of the Gyeongbu Expressway, which was wanted and even designed by President Park. And I emphasize the fact that at that time, no one in the world believed in that project. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, refused to give money to this project. But President Park took the responsibility. I think it is a great, big challenge, but we will do it because I believe in the South Korean people. And finally, as you all know, it was a great success, which allowed Koreans to gain confidence in themselves, which helped the economic development of the country. And for my students, I always made the connection between this picture, which has been taken in 1970, and sometimes I told them that this picture has been taken in France and that it is a French highway. They all believe that. And 10 seconds after I said it's wrong. It was taken in South Korea in 1970, and they are really very puzzled by this truth. And furthermore, I show them picture of President Park in helicopter, looking over the work of the Gyeongbu Expressway, and insisted for the highway to be completed as soon as possible. And my students remember the word from the KTV reporter Pali Pali, which described the reality of South Korea, as you may know. A small anecdote about that. 2 years ago, I met a student that I haven't seen for 10 years. So I had him 12 years ago in Joseon-sei. He told me that he forgot everything about President Park, but the Gyeongbu Expressway. He still remembered this example of the Gyeongbu Expressway. I think it's because, actually, when you are driving, you're always at a moment on an expressway, so you can remember it. National cohesion, national spirit is an essential element of President Park's philosophy, as you know. The spirit of the Seminole movement was very important at that time. And to help the student to understand this, especially my young student from Chinese International section, I organized a role-playing games. Actually, 12 students were volunteers to transform themselves into South Korean Seminole volunteers of the 70s, and they had the task to explain to their comrades the objective, the goals of the Seminole movement, the method of the Seminole movement, President Park's leading role in the Seminole movement, and the symbol of the Seminole movement. And as you can see here, they were particularly proud to be in charge of explaining the Seminole movement to their comrades. And I found particularly symbolic and amusing to see French students with Chinese origins playing roles of South Korean volunteers of the Seminole movement. It is a proof that the Seminole movement is not only South Korean, it can be spread worldwide and it can be understood and taught by students from every country in the world. Look at this one, Antoine, he has a t-shirt with the name France, but he had the cap of the Seminole movement. And they are all explaining and talking with books of the 70s about the strategy of the Seminole movement. A third point, very important point for President Park, is perseverance. Sometimes this point has been misunderstood by many people who have a severe judgment, a severe appreciation on President Park, especially in the early 70s, when global growth slowed down, and then with the crisis of energy in 1973, President Park, especially in this time, insisted to the people to, on the contrary, persevere and accelerate. And this is one of the reasons of the Yushin Constitution in 1972. Do not turn away from the goals in uncertain times. The result is significant. You can see here on this curve the level, the GDP of inhabitants of South Korea and North Korea. It is almost the same till the beginning of the 70s, and after the curve of South Korea is up on North Korea, which ran into stagnation and after decrease. So it is exactly at this moment that all has been decided between North Korea and South Korea, and the result that I showed to the students is absolutely impressive. The $10 billion export is reached in 1977, 4 years before the term, term. Normally they wanted to achieve that in 1981, and 1 year later, the institutional investor, an American magazine, headlined "South Korea Challenged the World" with two small subtitles. I will read them even if it injures my national pride. Bigger than English. This is April 1978. All of this I explained to my students, doing the connection between the strategy, the method, the 5 years developing plans, the results here, the two curves, North Korea and South Korea, the $10 billion exportations, and the future. What was waiting for South Korea in the future, and also here the rank, the hierarchy of South Korea among the economic powers, so that the student can see by comparison, because it's very important in history to do comparison with other countries, that South Korea year after year, step by step, gained places in the ranking of economic power. Finally, I will just emphasize about the special relation of South Korea and France, and I want to insist that France was considered by President Park as a friendly nation and also a source of inspiration. And I do that with the students because they can do the connection, they can rely with their own knowledge and with the French history, which isn't an evidence at the beginning, because South Korea and France are very far away, two different worlds, I would say. But instead of this, the history and the culture of France are a source of interest and inspiration for President Park. As you may know, the figure of the French Emperor Napoleon was inspired President Park when he was a teacher in 1937. And he was already telling the story of hero Napoleon to his students when he was a young teacher, only 20 years old. Furthermore, I discovered in the personal library of President Park at the Park Chung-hee Memorial Foundation books in French, books in French language, and not books about economic development or books about history, but books about art, books about painting, books about architecture. And it is for me a real important sign that President Park was interested not only by economy, not only by policy, but by all the aspects of the culture of a foreign country, and especially the culture of France. France's domestic and foreign policy inspires President Park as well. It is an admirer of the famous General de Gaulle. De Gaulle was the president of France a short time just after World War II, and a longer time between 1958 and 1969. And de Gaulle played also a leading role in giving confidence to the French people during the 60s. And we knew our best period of economic growth and social development in the 60s with de Gaulle as a ruler. President Park was in touch with de Gaulle. They exchanged letters. And I was really touched and moved when last year, when I visited the Park Chung-hee Museum in Kumi, I noticed a small brief of congratulations of de Gaulle to President Park for his election in 1963. And after this, the two heads of state exchanged messages, and that's why President Park, in the late 70s, insisted for a translation into French of one of his books, the Path of the Renewal of the Nation, La Voie du Renouveau de la Nation. And this book has been translated into French in 1979, some weeks before President Park passed away. Beyond this, President Park took inspiration in the constitution of the Fifth Republic for the Yushin Constitution, because the Fifth Republic gave the French presidents a very strong role, a very important role, and we are still in the Fifth Republic. The French president has more power than the American president in France. It is hard to believe, but it is true. So President Park took his inspiration because he noted that de Gaulle, through this constitution, maintained and enhanced the unity of the French people. Furthermore, France is for President Park a diplomatic partner. French diplomacy supports the South Korean diplomacy, in particular to develop relations with African countries. The French diplomacy can be considered as some kind of go-between, some kind of intermediary power. Here you can see a meeting between President Park and the Prime Minister of Djibouti in 1978. Djibouti was a former French colony, and I discovered in the diplomatic archives in Seoul that the French ambassador was kind of go-between to establish relations between Djibouti and South Korea. France is for President Park a military and economic partner, and also for science and technology. You can see here the Minister of Science and Technology, Choi Young-sop, who made an official state visit in France in 1972, and to establish links and technology transfers between South Korea and France. And here you can see the inauguration of the Paldan hydroelectric power station in 1974, which has been built with the help of French engineers and of French technology. So this relations was really important for President Park, because even if President Park said that the South Koreans must create their own technology, they must take their inspiration in foreign country. That's exactly what you have heard about the Japan. Japan should inspire South Korea as well as other European countries. And last but not least, France must be a cultural partner for South Korea. I always tell this anecdote to my students. They are really, really surprised when I tell them that Park Geun-hye, the daughter of President Park, has been sent to France in 1974 to make his studies, technological study in Grenoble. My student thought she would have been sent to United States or to another country, but President Park chose France. I found this as a French guy very, very touching and moving, that he chose France for his beloved daughter, Park Geun-hye. The thing is that, unfortunately, President Park didn't make a state visit to France, but it was almost the case. In 1964, an official visit to France was planned, but at the last moment, President Park chose to renounce to this for economic purpose. It would be too expensive for South Korea to make a state visit in Germany and after to France. And another time, in 1971, it was planned to do a state visit to France, but at that time, the political context in South Korea was a bit complicated, so President Park, for the second time, renounced to do this visit. I can only regret this. Let me end my purpose about the relation between President Park and France by an example to show that the perception of history, of memory, depend on the context and on the time. I always talk to my students about a forgotten book written in 1977 by a French journalist, a French famous journalist, Max-Olivier Lacan. The title is Morning Calme, Matin Calme, and it is a book about South Korean history. Max-Olivier Lacan writes a lot about President Park. Max-Olivier Lacan was married to a South Korean woman, and he met several times President Park, and he writes a portrait of President Park. Max-Olivier Lacan speaks about the thoughts of a patriotic and philosophical head of state. Max-Olivier Lacan writes about an efficient, discreet, and firm head of state. Furthermore, Max-Olivier Lacan makes a comparison with a North Korean leader, because at that time, a lot of people in France, especially among the intellectuals, were fascinated by communism. Of course it's because I pronounce the word communism. So we're fascinated by communism. And Max-Olivier Lacan writes, those who are tempted to draw a parallel between Marshal Kim Il-sung and General Park Chung-hee would be making a serious mistake. If the first is dictatorial, the second is firm, and the manifestation of their powers is totally opposite. The meeting of Max-Olivier Lacan with President Park inspires him to write the book. In his book, it was while reflecting on the subject discussed in front of me by the President during a private conversation in which my wife participated that I wanted to write this book to try to explain a little about the Korea of yesteryear and that of today, so little known of the French public. As a conclusion, I hope that the French students are now able to understand that President Park is both a national and global leader. He is a man of the present and of the future, but he knows the past of South Korea. he told to Max Olivier Lacan for his book Le Matin Calme, we will regenerate this land of our ancestors in a tireless effort to exalt our pride, and our pride in being an old country of high civilization, at the same time as a modern and prosperous people. And I give the last word to my students, because they embody the future. At the end of the role-playing game with my young students about the Semal Ungdon, we were thinking on a conclusion which would summarize the philosophy of Park Chung-hee through the movement. And one student came up with this sentence: in South Korea, success is a collective adventure. 감사합니다.
존경하시는 분 계시나요? 이런 사람 내가 질의 좀 할게. 통역 좀 잘 해주세요. 저는 박정희 대통령이 태어난 이 고향에서 제가 초등학교 한 3, 4학년 다닐 때부터 그 역사를 쭉 알고 지금까지 살아온 사람으로서 저보다도 더 훨씬 많은 어떤 역사에, 박정희 대통령 역사에 대한 지식을 갖고 오늘 강의를 해주신 데 먼저 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 큰 박수 한번 주십시오. 그런데 제가 오늘 한 서너 가지 말씀을 좀 드리고 싶은데 오늘 1시간 한 10분간 강의 속에서 제가 보기에는 박정희 대통령 그 이름 석자에 대한 공만 오늘 공과 가가 있는데 공만 강의를 하신 것 같아요. 그래서 제 생각에는 100%를 본다면은 거의 100에 가까운 공만 말씀을 하셨는데 역사를 항상 저는 이 사단법인 박정희와 대한민국이라는 이 사정을 맡고 늘 하는 얘기가 분명히 나 자신도 그렇고 누구나 공과 가가 있다 살아가면서. 그래서 박정희 대통령이 과가 있습니다. 그래서 저는 생각에 과는 한 1%다. 왜 1%냐? 18년 동안 대한민국의 이 삶의 질을 높이기 위해서 경제 대국을 미래에 만들기 위해서 그 과가 1%가 있었다. 그것을 좀 설명을 해주시고 공과 과를 가미를 하면은 아마 전 세계 어디 가서 국민들을 더 이해를 시키지 않겠나. 박정희 대통령 과가 전혀 없다. 이래 하면은 혹시나 이해를 좀 못 받아들일 수가 있으니까 공은 99%고 과는 1%다. 그걸 가미를 좀 시켜주는 게 오히려 역사를 바로 세우는데 이해가 더 되지 않겠나 하는 제가 제 나름대로의 의견을 한번 제시를 합니다. 네. 그리고 오늘 제가 새로운 것을 교수님으로부터 이제 배운 것은 제가 2014년도부터 베트남에 지금 기업을 일부를 옮겼습니다. 10년이 됐는데 교수님 말씀하시는 대로 베트남과 미국과의 전쟁에 우리가 그 지원을 갔다. 저도 그렇게 생각을 하고 베트남 그 나이 드신 분들하고 대화 속에서 그런 얘기들을 그런 쪽으로 이해를 하고 대화를 했었는데 오늘 교수님 말씀을 들어보니까 월명과 월남과의 전쟁은 자유를 위한 전쟁이었다. 이걸 오늘 새삼스럽게 이해를 했습니다. 그래서 이번에 저는 항상 한 달에 한두 번 다니기 때문에 그네들을 만나면은 교수님 말씀하신 거를 그걸 새삼스럽게 다시 한번 얘기를 해야겠다. 우리 박정희 대통령이 무조건 전쟁 속에서 외화벌이로 갖는 게 아니다. 그네들은 그런 걸 생각을 하고 있어요. 그래서 자유를 사회주의 공산국가와 민주주의 사회를 자유를 찾아주기 위해서 박정희 대통령은 우리 국군 약 4,000명이 넘는 4,400명인가 4,000명이 넘는 군인이 전사를 했어요. 또 양민이 84,000명이 지금 죽었다 그러거든요. 사명을 베트남 사람들이 그거를 충분히 제가 이해시키겠다. 오늘 좋은 교육을 제가 들었고요. 두 번째는 교수님이 살고 계시는 프랑스의 어떤 국민들이 대한민국을 어떻게 생각하고 있고 대한민국의 앞으로 미래가 어떻게 더 발전할 것이냐 그걸 한번 말씀해 주시고 교수님은 박정희 대통령을 역사를 지금 강의를 하고 다니시는데 대한민국의 앞으로 미래에 얼마만큼 발전해 갈 수 있겠는가 그거 한번 말씀해 주시고 그 다음에 마지막으로 지금 전 세계가 제가 보는 느낌은 대한민국을 비롯해서 많은 자쪽으로 지금 좌클릭을 좀 하고 있어요. 프랑스도 제가 보기에는 좀 마찬가지인 것 같고 왜 그런 현상들이 지금 일어나고 있는지 그것도 한번 말씀해 주시면 좋겠습니다. 이상입니다.
Well, thank you, but there are a lot of questions, so I will try to answer this as fast as possible, if I might say so. About the positive and negative appreciation of President Park, maybe I will surprise you, but this is not my task. I am a historian. I have to work with sources, to explain things, to put them into historical context. And it is not my role to give good marks or bad marks. It is not my role to be a judge or to be, a historical trial. I think that the audience, my students, are mature enough to do their own opinion. And you pay great attention to my lecture, and I thank you for that. And I didn't say that it was good or that it was bad. I mean, people can say about the Yushin constitution that President Park was wrong to restrain liberties, and people can say that he was wrong to send troops to Vietnam, to dispatch troops in Vietnam. I didn't say that it was good or that it was bad. I really tried to put this into a historical context to explain why he did this and to show with facts the result of his task. And I know that it is a sensitive topic. That's precisely which motivates me. Because I really think that if we look further the sources, if we are reasonable, if we work on President Park without passion, if we don't worship him, if we don't condemn him, maybe we can try to find a path, to find a way to come to a reasonable and interesting appreciation of his task. That's difficult. I know that's difficult. This is my task, and I will try to do that in the future. But thank you for having given me the opportunity to talk about this problem, because I am frequently asked about my appreciation or evaluation about President Park, and I say President Park is not my student. I am not here to give him a good mark or bad mark. Well done, my little chunky, you are well done, and you deserve a good mark. This is not my goal. I'm really here to put things into historical context and to make comparisons with other states. And I am doing this kind of lessons for my students for 10 years, for 12 years now. And I must recognize that each year a lot of students come to me and to talk about this after, but they are mature enough to do their own opinion. And I never heard a student who told me after this, oh, President Park was bad or President Park was good. Let us say it happened in South Korea. The fact that I am French, maybe I can keep a distance from this because I'm not South Korean, so it's much more comfortable for me. Yeah. About the left side, in France. The thing is that the French policy is very polarized right now, and we have. So it's really difficult for me to answer to this question because I don't want. I am an historian and history teacher, so I don't want to talk about current policy in France right now. This is not my task. It won't be reasonable, and I'm not here to give my political opinions. The thing is that I always remember a word, a sentence of my grandfather, my own grandfather. He was born in 1917, like President Park, and he passed away when he was 100 years ago, 100 years later. And he was a soldier, and he used to live in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Germany, in France, of course. And so he was, I think he was able to have consideration for, about the 20th century and the democracy in Western countries and in all over the world. And he always tells me democracy disappears by excess of laxism, by excess of, let it do, let it go. If a democracy is not able to defend itself, if the democracy is not able to have the right tools to be strong, it will disappear. And maybe in France now we are facing a big problem, a big issue, because the far left and the far right are very strong, and the path for a reasonable conception of policy is really, really straight. And I deplore this. This is becoming a huge problem. But as long as, the political behaviors continue to be excessive, to be extreme, we will never find, a reasonable way to solve these our issues in France. On the other hand, it had always belonged to French mentality to be divided and quarrel. This is maybe some kind of something we have in common with South Korean. When I'm reading the books of President Park, sometimes I recognize my own country. But like South Korean, South Korean were able to do the Gyeongbu Expressway. We were able to do the Paris Olympic Games in spite of a very tense national context, and it was a success. So I met 3 days ago a former advisor of President Park for the Seminole movement, and former Minister Ko. And Minister Ko told me, that was his conclusion to our conversation, which was really moving for me, that we must stay optimistic and we must face the future with consideration and with hope. And I was really touched by this conclusion from a South Korean old man, 91 years old, who has seen all of this evolution of South Korea, and who tried to tell me we must stay optimistic and we must overcome all obstacles about that. I think this is a great lesson of life, if I might say so.
교수님, 지금까지 말씀해 주신 게 굉장히 가슴에 닿습니다. 먼저 프랑스라는 나라에서 우리 교수님 같은 분이 있다는 데에서 굉장히 고무적으로 생각을 합니다. 아까 커피숍에서 잠깐 인사를 드렸었는데 나는 굉장히 젊은 분이 이런 저걸 하고 계시는가 깜짝 놀랐어요. 적어도 박정희를 연구하려고 그러면은 적어도 한 60대 70대는 돼줘야면은 안 알겠느냐 이렇게 생각을 했는데 나중에 물어보니까 지금 굉장히 젊으시고 적어도 프랑스 배우의 그 아랑드롱 정도 이상 가는 그런 인물을 갖고 계시는데 뭐 반갑습니다. 제가 이제 몇 가지 이제 묻고 싶은 거는 이미 우리 이사장님하고 그 얘기 도중에 인권이라든가 유신이라든가 이런 부분은 뭐 다 설명이 다 나왔습니다. 나와버렸고 제가 세 가지는 물으려고 그랬었는데 두 가지는 버리고 한 가지는 묻겠습니다. 전 세계의 지도자들이 굉장히 많습니다. 뭐 벌써 돌아가시나 죽은 사람들도 있고 지금 현재 뭐 지도자들도 많은데 왜 하필이면은 우리 대한민국의 박정희라는 인물에 대해 가지고 그렇게 연구를 하시고 했는가 여기에 대해서 한번 저도 면밀하게 한번 듣고 싶습니다. 이상입니다. 고맙습니다.
Okay, so first of all, I hope the comparison with Alain Delon is Alain Delon when he was 46 and not Alain Delon now. But thank you so much. Yeah, about the fact that that's a very personal question you asked me about why I choose to work on President Park. I must say that sometimes when I am explaining the story of his life to my students or to an audience in France, because I am doing a lot of lectures for association in France to a French audience, and I explain the biography of President Park from his birth to his death. And I say, you know, if a screenwriter in Hollywood would have written this for a movie, I'm pretty sure that producer would have answered it's unrealistic. It's unrealistic. Such a life, nobody could live this. And, you know, in France we are very sentimental, and I was touched by his fate, by his life. I mean, it's a life full of adventure, of tragedies, of success, of failures. Also, he recognized this. It is, for me, the most extraordinary, amazing life of an historical figure in the modern South Korea history. And that's why I chose to work on him, because he is a fascinating character. And that's why I think I want to watch him as soon as possible. But I mean, it is a source of inspiration for maybe 1,000 movies and 1,000 series and K-dramas. And till now, a lot of movies and a lot of depicted President Park a bit in a caricatural way. So it is my regret, but maybe it is also, I would say, the law of culture and medias. But I really think that if we come closer to make the link between his personality, his life, and the fate of South Korea, we can better understand the choices he did for his country. That was my answer. I come back, it's not a problem. You know, with me, if you push the button Park Chung-hee, I talk about him during days, weeks, so don't hesitate.
질문하겠습니다. 네, 질문하겠습니다. 질문하겠습니다.
Yeah, sorry.
오늘 강의가 새마을대학에서 유명한 교수님부터 강의를 듣는 그런 기분입니다. 그런 기분이고, 또 박정희 대통령에 대한 그 브리핑을 하시는데 정치적인 문제와 또 이 문제를 학술적으로 잘 풀어가지고 또 말씀해 주셔가지고 또 고맙고, 특히 여기에 모이신 분들은 박정희 대통령을 고향 사람들입니다. 박정희 대통령에 대해서는 너무나 잘 아는 사람들이에요. 여기 와서 박정희 대통령의 외국분이 박정희 대통령의 잘했는 것을 또 이렇게 강의하시고 이런 것을 정말로 우리 고향 사람으로서는 진짜 고맙게 생각합니다. 고맙게 생각하고 강의도 학술적으로 엮어가지고 정말로 잘해주셨어요. 네, 그래서 이제 이거는 칭찬이고, 제가 이제 질문을 드리겠습니다. 한국에서는 박정희 대통령의 유신에 대한 얘기가 일부 사람들이 자꾸 ጭ거리고 있어요. 기분 나쁘게 자꾸 유신에 대한 얘기를 좀 하고 있으니까 영 기분이, 우리 고향 사람들은 기분이 안 좋아요. 그래서 우리 교수님께서는 외국인의 입장에서 이 유신에 대해서는 어떻게 생각하고 계시는지 말씀을 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
So I won't give you my opinion because I'm a historian. So I talk about this a bit during the lecture. Just maybe from foreign countries. History is really a matter of comparison with other countries. If you consider the number of true liberal democracy at that time in the world in the 70s, you have West European countries, North America, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. Those we can have jobs because there is only one party who had the power, the Liberal Democratic Party at that time, and that's all. I mean, all the other countries in the world in the 70s are semi-democratic countries or authoritarian regimes or totalitarian states like the communist states. So again, we must consider this regarding the time, regarding the context. When President Park took this decision in 1972, he was criticized in South Korea, but in foreign countries, some voices say, oh, that's an authoritarian movement for the regime, but I mean, I examined it in French newspaper from 1972. They didn't say more about South Korea than about Singapore at the same time, or about the Republic of China at the same time. So, of course, we are now looking the Yushin Constitution with our eyes of today, and we can't do we can't do with other means. I mean, we are forced to do that. But we always must pay attention, not apply our value skills of today to the past. That would be a big mistake. Of course, we are allowed to say that a political leader was courageous, was a coward, was cruel, had a vision, and so on. But again, we must put this thing into the historical context, and that's why I'm trying to do with the Yushin Constitution. My students understand this very well. They are not particularly shocked by this. When I explain them, they just listen, write, and yeah, that was the period, that was the time for a lot of countries. Authoritarian government, authoritarian regime were a way to develop themselves faster than democracies. I mean, it takes time to be a true, real democracy. In France, we took more than 100 years from French Revolution to the late 19th century. We have 3 republics in 100 years, 3 different monarchies, 1 emperor and 2 other monarchies. So, I mean, we don't have lesson to do to other countries. You know what I mean? And I have a great admiration for the South Korean people, because in a very, very limited period, they learned everything about economy and about policy and about democracy. So, congratulations to you above all.